Hello and welcome to the Double Edge Podcast, an open forum in which two people from each side of the political spectrum meet to discuss current events. My name is Jabari Cope, and I will be the moderator for today. And here we are joined with
Upamaka
and
Ethan Winchester
on one side, and on the other side we have
Daniel Gordon
and
Colby Winter.
Okay, and so this month we will be discussing gun control mainly. So let me just hear your side and go from there.
All right, so my side of the story is that with the latest rise in gun-related attacks and about a 38% increase in gun-related homicides in Missouri alone over the past 5 years, it's pretty unacceptable to just let people get guns without any sort of precautionary stay, and Missouri even had the audacity to loosen gun control regulations. So I just don't think that's an acceptable stance in this particular stage.
Well, what would your regulations be though? Because there's background checks and stuff like that, but stuff like shootings or like that, there's a lot of mental illness going on with whoever is doing the shooting.
Well, that's part of the problem too. It's not actually background checked. You see, nowadays, since most of the mental health care is just gone, people get guns who have mental issues, and nothing's no one checks or does any sort of background checks on them, and they just get through and they can get their guns.
Well, I believe that people who have mental illnesses shouldn't be allowed to have a gun. I know that's not really, it's taken away one of their rights, but we have to make sure that we're taking precautions with people who have illnesses because we don't know what they can do. But I believe that people who want to be able to have a gun and use the Second Amendment, they can, whether it be against tyrannical governments or internal threats or domestic threats. I believe that that is personally fine.
All right, so currently you say that the looseness of gun control is unacceptable. What would you change them to, so to speak?
Well, first off, not a lot of these people who need mental health care are seeking it. And basically, I would institute probably a mental health test, probably a background check from a psychiatrist. It's going to cost more money, but I believe in the long run it would save more lives. Just a projection of it would be just less people getting access to guns that could do harm to themselves or others. Because it's not just homicides that we're looking at, it's suicides caused by guns. And we want to prevent as much loss of American life as we can. That's my stance on it.
Yeah, I feel like if somebody has the incentive to commit suicide, a gun isn't necessary to do.
But it's one of the easiest ways too. You see, gun deaths with suicides are really they're probably easier to commit. It's an easier method of suicide than hangings or any of that because a lot of homes have guns in the house. Some aren't even in safes or any sort of protective measures.
How many homes have guns in them?
I mean, most.
I don't have that statistic, but if there is a home with a gun that doesn't have a safe in it, that's a danger to people around it.
Okay, well, I would believe that most people who would have a gun would have a safe in there. If people that don't have a safe for their gun, I don't think that they're necessarily being as responsible as they should be with their gun. But definitely if you have a gun, that you should have a safe and you should have it in a safe spot so no one else can get to it.
The problem is most people don't. As we've seen, toddlers have actually taken those guns, they've picked them up, they don't know what they are, and they've actually ended up killing one of their sisters or brothers, and this is a very common thing that's been happening recently because people don't have gun safes or they don't put away their guns in places where their children can't reach.
I feel like that's not the fault of gun control, though. That's just the fault of the parent or
but it's
the
still
guardian.
that is the case, but we just got to that subject. But yeah, gun control isn't really related to that. It's just we also need to kind of tell people that they need to lock up their guns, and this also links into mental illness because a lot of these parents, they have guns. They shoot, for example, Sandy Hook. The parents of that, the guy who did it, they had guns in their home that were not locked up, and he used them to shoot up a school.
And even not as recently, you look at shootings that happened in the 90s, like Columbine, and while gun control regulations have been instituted in that particular state where it happened, they still haven't changed across the country. The only reason those boys got guns back at Columbine was because their friends gave them to them. That lack of control over where those guns are going and what's happening with them, and just a lack of regulations against what happened is quite frankly unacceptable, and it should be more restricted.
How are you going to stop that? How are you going to stop a kid from taking a gun from the house? Like, yes, you can have a safe, but if there's not a safe, then, like, gun control doesn't necessarily stop that. Like, if the parent is a law-abiding citizen, no mental illness, etc., like, you still can't stop that child. It's not the parents' fault. It's not the government's fault that happened.
Well, the government can regulate it. For example, you can have like a fine if you were found not having your gun secured properly, which is what, like with cars, for example. If you have an unsafe car, you get a fine. You know, headlights are out, you get a fine. Same way with guns. If you have a gun in a place that wouldn't be safe for your family or children, where it's in a place it can be taken by someone and used, you would probably get a fine. That's the way to do it. If people know that they're going to get a fine for not having, their guns in a safe place, they'll lock them up and actually take the effort, to put them away.
So in that instance, then, would you say that the police should be more proactive in that regard, or
Yes.
more reactive in the sense that somebody should, like, report to them, hey, I know this person is being negligent with their gun, can you come check it out?
Yeah, it's, for example, it's like how like people report that, oh, my neighbor is abusing their children. Well, it'd be the same way. I mean, if someone needs to tell somebody if their children, someone they know isn't in a safe environment.
But I mean, how's a neighbor really gonna know? I mean,
How
unless
the-
you have a gun sitting right there on the counter.
I mean, yeah, that'd be the case. They go in their house, they see a gun on the counter, they see their kids maybe playing around in the next room. Just an accident. It's just waiting to happen.
I feel like at that point it's already too late. So I'm taking the opposite stance from Ethan here. I would suggest a more proactive stance, where there are regular checks going on and things like that. Yes, it could be considered an invasion of privacy, but you would have that on consent forms when you would get a gun. And this all sounds theoretical, but in the long run, it would lead to less loss of life in general. And that's what we're trying to prevent here with gun control.
Well, there was in 2012 in Australia, they completely banned guns. And when they did that, armed robberies went up by 69%, assaults with guns went up by 28%, and gun murders went up by 19%. And also home invasions jumped to 21%. So I think that if we were to do that, the problem would be there would still be a lot of crimes that would be committed, even if we weren't to get rid of guns. But if we were to get rid of more guns, I think that crime would go up quite a bit, rather.
The difference with that statistic is that we're not completely considering, like, the Supreme Court defined the Second Amendment as a right for Americans to have their own personal guns. And people have been arguing for that for years and years. But what we're suggesting here is not an entire, lack of Second Amendment right. What we're suggesting is more control on it, so as to prevent loss of life.
So just a proactive stance, or what other regulations would you institute?
Background checks.
Background checks,
Or
more
background
severe
safety
mental health
standards,
checks, because that's the main problem that's going on right now. With people who are getting guns, like the Sandy Hook shooter and the Las Vegas shooters, they're getting these guns, and the people who are selling them these guns are under the assumption that these people are of sound mental health. They have no reason to be suspicious of them. That's the sneaky thing about mental health. It's inside your head. Nobody can tell. So what we would suggest is more conclusive mental health background checks, instead of just, did this guy have any felonies in the past? Is he above 18? If both of those conditions are fulfilled, then you can have a gun. Instead of that, we would suggest more severe, more rigorous mental health testing.
Yeah, I feel like that's fair. That's the biggest
Yeah.
problem with all the shootings. And
Yeah.
But how would you be able to get somebody who is going to be purchasing a gun to take that test?
Well, they're like getting a physical.
It's mandatory.
They would,
It's like getting a physical for a sport.
You got to get a note from your doctor, or your doctor filled a form saying that so and so cannot have a gun. It's unsafe.
So in this case, you would suggest that someone, if they wanted to own a gun, would have to go to go through a process,
Psychiatric testing.
a psychiatric test, to ensure that they were not suitable to have a gun or not, and then they would then verify that and give it to wherever you're going to, whatever method you're going to get your legally purchased firearm.
Correct.
Okay. Do you guys have anything else to say about gun control as to why we shouldn't have it or ways to improve it without making it overly strict.
I feel like that's the way to do it. I mean, mental health is the biggest problem. Gun control in and of itself, it's not overbearing at the moment, and I think that's how it should be.
All right. So there you have it, guys. We have seemingly come to a conclusion that the best way to move forward is to improve background checks by making sure that you have no mental health issues. Can we both agree on that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I agree.
All right, so I think that wraps up the Double Edge podcast for today.